1980. Ronald Reagan wins the presidential election. The American Midwest is struck with a devastating summer heat wave. The draft is reinstated in response to the Soviet invasion of Afghanistan. Iran and Iraq go to war. John Lennon is shot outside his apartment. We have the births of Lin-Manuel Miranda, Venus Williams, and the Rubik's Cube. In the world of American television, 1980 was a gradual year, marked with more slight adjustments than big steps. For example, NBC aired Barbara Mandrell and the Mandrell Sisters, a musical variety show, one of many, but the last variety show to peak at 40 million viewers, marking the gradual decline of an entire genre of television. It's a small thing, but an important one for the landscape. Likewise, cable television didn't make many huge leaps and bounds in 1980, with one major exception: the premiere of Cable News Network, or CNN, on June 1st, the first 24-hour news station. Outside of that, it was all fine-tuning. For Nickelodeon, the goal was to create some stability. It had spent 1979 still somewhat attached to its Cube parentage, as just about every program on the station was either brought over wholesale from Cube or used Cube resources and personnel. What's more, there were major shifts going on within Warner Communications, just as Nickelodeon was getting out into the world. While Cube was technologically innovative and a critical success, it ultimately lost money, and Nickelodeon was a loss leader by design. They needed some financial help. 1979 saw the credit card company American Express buy up 50% of Warner Communications for $175 million, creating a joint venture split between the two operations. Warner-amex Cable Communications Incorporated, which developed Warner's cable systems, and Warner-amex Satellite Entertainment Company, which developed programming for those cable systems and other cable systems. What joining forces with a financial service like American Express allowed was a direct line of credit with major banks, bringing in a budget of $800 million. That's $800 million in credit. If that doesn't sound like a great idea, well, wait until we get to 1983. With a bit more financial security in their parent company, the next step for Nickelodeon was to firm up leadership. There wasn't really anybody steering the ship in 1979. You had a bunch of Electric Company alumni, led by Dr. Vivian Horner, running the creative side of things, and a bit of Cube's pre-existing infrastructure, but no real business leader overseeing the committee. So the chief executive of Warner-amex Satellite Communications, Jack Schneider, and the executive vice president and chief operating officer, John Lack, went on the hunt for somebody to take charge of the first TV network for kids. They needed somebody with experience in taking experiments in television and weaving them into gold. And that happened to be this man's entire resume. Everyone meet the first head of Nickelodeon, Cy Schneider. No relation to Jack. The thing about Cy Schneider was that his primary experience in television was not in the creation and management of programming, but in advertising. His career started all the way back in 1953. As an agent for a small California-based advertising agency named Carson Roberts. In 1954, Schneider began working with an out-of-their-garage toy company called Mattel Creations. The focus back then was on print advertising, catalogs and such, but Schneider and Mattel's founders, Elliot and Ruth Handler, took a massive $500,000 gamble on buying advertising space on this new up-and-coming show called The Mickey Mouse Club. The concept of television commercials was still very much in a developmental stage. Much of early television was broadcast live, so, like radio before it, advertising usually had to be performed live during the show. The effectiveness of that advertising depended on the energy and performance of the actors presenting it. The gradual introduction of pre-recorded commercials allowed it for new marketing strategies. Instead of an adult actor demonstrating a toy to parents to try and convince them to buy it for their kids, toy adverts could have little stories of kids playing with those toys, show us their imagination space as they use them. A child hunts elephants with his toy gun. A child acts out a Wild West fantasy with his toy gun. The 1950s were basically all about those toy guns. These advertisements aimed at children instead of parents, which from a cold robotics standpoint would seem illogical. Parents are the ones with the money, the ones who actually buy the toys, but Schneider banked on the idea that a child expressing interest in a toy to their parents was more successful than advertising to the parents directly. It worked incredibly well. Between the style of commercial Schneider was producing and the Disney legacy making the Mickey Mouse Club the most successful children's programming of its time, Mattel's profits soared. Schneider's relationship with Mattel lasted for 26 years, including overseeing the marketing development of Mattel's two biggest product lines, Barbie and Hot Wheels. Schneider's success resulted in him becoming president of Carson Roberts in 1965. The company was bought and absorbed into Ogilvy and Mather in 1970. All told, Schneider had a hand in either writing, directing, or supervising over 1,000 television commercials for 400 different products aimed at children, for companies like Mattel, Hershey's, Post Cereal, Baskin-Robbins, and Burger Chef. Now, Schneider's bread and butter was commercials, but he did end up getting involved in producing actual television productions. The Mickey Mouse Club closed its doors for the first time in 1959, but Mattel was not going to be denied its advertising space. So they developed a show of their own, Maddie's Fun Day Funnies.
It's time for Fun Day Funnies! Fun Day!
Hi kids, Mattel Toy Makers present Fun Day Funnies with Maddie Mattel, the king of toys, who says to all you girls and boys, you can tell it's Mattel, it's swell!
Maddie's Fun Day Funnies was a package show that combined pre-existing Baby Huey, Caspy the Friendly Ghost, and Little Audrey cartoons with original animation starring Mattel's mascot, Maddie. Oh ho ho, toy brand television wasn't something created in the 1980s with He-Man and Care Bears. Cy Schneider was helping develop that kind of stuff in the 50s. Moreover, you can see the echoes of this package show format in most of Nickelodeon's 1979 programming. And then there was the Hot Wheels cartoon in 1969. Schneider's involvement with this one was pretty minimal. It was a show created by his Carson Roberts associates while he was president of the company, and it was built on the foundation Schneider left, but he didn't have any creative say in it. It's still worth bringing up though, because the show ended up being criticized by the FCC. There was protest of the idea of a toy company owning both a half-hour animated program based on a pre-existing toy and the advertising space around that program. A little bit of the protesting came from Parents Group, but most of it came from Mattel's toy company competitors like Topper Toys. The FCC didn't shut the show down, but they did force Mattel to log parts of it as advertising time, another step in the FCC putting a clamp down on advertising and non-educational children's programming. That is, until the removal of these regulations at the behest of Ronald Reagan in 1984, opening the floodgates to the He-Man and Care Bears era of children's television. But we're getting ahead of ourselves. The point is, Cy Schneider was a commercial guy being asked to run a station that didn't run commercials. In early 1980, Cy Schneider was working as a senior international executive for Ogilvy and Mather, and was asked to go to New York to help counsel Jack Schneider and John Lack in their development of Nickelodeon. I had met Jack only briefly during his days at CBS, and with more time was captivated by his style. I was also taken by John Lack's vitality and vision for the future. We had a whirlwind courtship, and by mid-year, I found myself heading Nickelodeon with the charge to pioneer it and build it into a significant and profitable business. A bright and shining new light in children's television. I'm not entirely sure why Schneider decided to describe his business partnership like a three-way queer romance, but I approve. Now, Cy Schneider came in midway through 1980, so it's not easy to say what creative decisions made that year were his and which ones were not, which shows were his and which ones were already in the works when he came in. What we can say is how Schneider wanted to sell this channel, and it can all be boiled down to one key word.
Here's Cy Schneider, Vice President of Nickelodeon, to explain the philosophy behind our Young People's Network.
Thank you very much. We created Nickelodeon to be entertaining and stimulating, but not academic in a teaching or classroom sense. I call it edutainment. The shows expand a child's interest by using entertainment to open up the worlds of art, music, and science.
The first known use of the word edutainment came from Walt Disney in 1954, something Schneider probably would have picked up from with his connection to the Mickey Mouse Club. Of course, the idea of combining educational content with engaging entertainment was not a new idea, but edutainment made a good buzzword, and Schneider knew his buzzwords. Oh, make no mistake, that footage right there was Schneider in salesman mode. That footage, which I've used several times by now, was a promotional video used to sell Nickelodeon to other cable subscriptions outside of those owned by warner-amex.
Say, Ebenezer, why don't you say hello to all those cable operators?
No, I'm not in the mood.
You want to be popular, Ebenezer, don't you? Think of your reputation.
That's right, Ebenezer. Think of your career.
Well, oh, all right, but just once. Hello.
Good for you, Ebenezer. Good for you. I bet you made everybody out there real happy.
While it was absolutely fair for a person in charge of a business to approach it as a business, Cy Schneider didn't really see Nickelodeon as an artistic venue. He saw it as a niche product filling a hole in the market. I wish I could say with some degree of honesty that it was warner-amex's or my own genuine desire to provide better, more inspiring children's programming because of a burning sense of social responsibility, or because we felt the country needed it. I can't. I would be kidding myself and you, and would not be able to make the point that Nickelodeon, for all its lofty aims and subsequent broadcasting awards, was and is a product born of the demands of the marketplace. Very little quality television for children existed. We believed there was a small market for it, and we could fill that void. Beyond that, our customers, the cable operator universe, wanted it, needed it, and would pay for it. They neither wanted nor would pay for the same kind of cartoon programming the commercial broadcasters were using. That's not to say that Schneider had no creative aspirations for Nickelodeon. We'll be covering a few in later episodes, but he never really left the advertising mindset that he'd been in the past 26 years. It's also worth noting that around the same time Cy Schneider came on board, Nickelodeon hired a former teacher and independent producer named Geraldine Laybourne to pitch them some shows. She'll become very important in a few years' time. So Nickelodeon had fresh funding from some big banks. They had the Mattel toy commercial guy running things. Now time to actually adjust the programming for the station. First, out with the old. Nickelflix didn't even make it to 1980, and Star Channel broke off and became its own thing as the movie channel right at the beginning of the year. Technically speaking, only 2 shows were canceled in 1980. By the Way, sorry Josie, and America Goes Bananas. 7 new programs were brought in throughout the year, along with a 2-hour-a-week programming block made independently from Nickelodeon. 2 of Nick's new shows were original productions, presumably to make up for the 2 original productions removed. 2 of these shows were pre-existing shows acquired by the station, and the final 3, well, I suppose they could be called package shows, just without any actual framing device. No puppets, no lead-in, just an opening theme, a short film Nickelodeon managed to get the rights to, and credits. The only thing setting these 3 programs apart was what they specifically aired. Today we're going to be talking about the least successful of these 3 programs, the one that only lasted a year, and alas, the only one I can't find a lick of footage from. Children's Classics. This is another one of those shows that we only know existed through print advertisements, specifically this one for the cable system out of a February 1980 issue of Toledo Blade from Toledo, Ohio. Children's Classics are high-quality presentations from the British Broadcasting Company. With universal appeal to children of all ages, BBC Children's Classics include such timeless tales as The Prince and the Pauper, Robin Hood, Hidy, and David Copperfield. Well, from just that tiny little paragraph, we're going to try to reverse engineer what Children's Classics might have been, much like we did with Nickelflix. First off, as far as I can tell, no show called Children's Classics ever aired on the BBC, so this wasn't an acquired program. However, the BBC did air serialized versions of The Prince and the Pauper, Robin Hood, Hidy, and David Copperfield throughout the 1970s, all multi-part adaptations with 6 half-hour episodes, and that would fit perfectly with Nickelodeon's commercial-free schedule. It wouldn't be the first time some of these serials were licensed in the States. The serials for The Prince and the Pauper, Robin Hood, and Hidy all aired on the PBS show Once Upon a Classic, which aired from 1976 till 1980 and was hosted by Bill Bixby of Incredible Hulk fame. Remember Bixby, he'll be popping again in a later episode. In any case, these serials probably wouldn't have been very expensive licensing to get, and presenting them would have kept up Nickelodeon's early edutainment image of being a special PBS you paid for. Considering some of the shows Nickelodeon would pick up in the next couple of years, I'm kind of surprised they didn't just grab the rights to Once Upon a Classic wholesale. Now, we're going to go forward under the likely assumption that Nickelodeon aired these 4 serials under the Children's Classics title and touch on each one a bit, in the order the print advertisement presents them. Ready? Let's go.
If once, just once, I could do the same. Soon to be king and yet knowing so little of my people. Sometimes I lie awake and dream that if for one small hour I could strip me of this attire and walk among my people, how much I would learn, and therefore rule them with an understanding heart. And I, sir, in my way, also dream. Tell me of your dream. I dare not. I command you, speak. I dream, sir, if I could clothe me once, as you are clothed. Perhaps then our meeting was not chance, but Providence.
Based on the book by Mark Twain, this is the story of 2 boys. Tom, a beggar child who aspires to live a greater life, and Edward, the Prince of Wales and next in line to be King of England, who's rather fed up with all these stuffy royal proceedings and wants to experience the true freedom of the commoner life. And it just so happens these 2 boys look a lot like each other, and they decide to swap places for an hour, spending the day in each other's shoes. Both boys are played by Nicholas Lyndhurst, who's gone on to have a pretty substantial television career. This is a horrible idea, however, as Edward ends up getting swept into Tom's abusive family life, and then the king dies, forcing Tom to act out Edward's coronation, and it's not like he knows what to do. We have adventure and intrigue as the forces around the 2 boys attempt to manipulate them. Well, how can the future king call himself a pauper? Surely he must be mad. This is our chance to take control of the kingdom. This 1976 adaptation, directed by Barry Letts, probably best known for his Doctor Who work, is pretty faithful to the original book, but like a lot of television costume dramas of its time, it's really dry. The set design is sparse, not that it matters because everyone seems to be filmed with the lights off. More distressing is a near-complete lack of soundtrack. Outside of the opening and closing theme, there's no non-diegetic music to speak of. Hey, we have this scene where 2 characters have to reach a certain location in time, and they're on horseback. Should we have some exciting music to go along with it? Nah. Shortly after this scene, we get the one real action moment in these 6 episodes, 2 guys sword fighting in a barn, and while the choreography's okay, it's all undercut because A, it's completely devoid of music, and B, the fact that this is mainstream television means you can't actually show the killing blow, so we instead cut to Edward looking absolutely bored.
You make for poor sport, master.
What was that? Was that a shot of Lyndhurst waiting between takes? It's certainly not a shot of a young boy watching a man stabbed to death. Hey, we got this juggler slash fire eater guy. He's really talented. Why don't we just show his act for 2 minutes? Okay, but only if we put a bunch of people in front of him so that you can't see all of it. The Prince and the Pauper is a story about the injustice of the class system and the corruption of royalty, exploring the divide between the common folk and the nobles by swapping members of each. This television adaptation gives that theming lip service, but I feel these ideas are undermined by decisions in the acting. All the noble characters are underacted, they're quiet and reserved, and don't give much away with emotion, while the commoners are overacted to a cartoonish degree, their plight not as easy to take seriously as it should be. Also, Edward just sucks. While Tom at least attempts to adjust and lie his way through a situation, Edward never stops claiming to be the prince, and you are his royal servants, and you must do what he says. Sure, there's a point there about how out of touch his royal highness is, but he caused all of this, and he needs to be the one who's humbled. At the end of the day, the kingdom would have been much better off if Edward had fallen into a ditch and Tom had remained king. That said, Lyndhurst was a pretty good child actor, and the doubling special effects to put Tom and Edward together is a lot better than you expect from 70s television. They even accounted for the shadows, that's cool. This is one of those adaptations you watch because you have to do a book report and can't be bothered to read the actual book. Not because it's actually a good time.
She's a great beauty.
Didn't hear you come up, Mother.
I could have come with a clap of thunder and you wouldn't have heard. She had you bewitched.
She is indeed beautiful.
Her charms will fade one day as mine did. Oh, yes, I was beautiful once, young sir. But she, too, will look in the glass one day and see her beauty die.
It will bloom for many a summer yet, I hope.
You do not fear old age or death?
Fear death? I seldom think of it.
You need not fear it, for you will never die. Saved by a woman's hand.
What?
Saved by a woman's hand, you will never die.
Wait. Wait.
Since Robin Hood, the bow and arrow wielding outlaw that steals from the rich and gives to the poor, is a folklore hero and doesn't have a singular canonized book, you can be a lot more loose with how you tell his story. Some people have Robin Hood be a commoner taking on an oppressive government. Some people have Robin Hood be an English nobleman who breaks free from the system to stand up for the little people. This serial splits the difference by having Robin Hood be of nobleman blood, but raised from infancy as a commoner. They give Robin Hood Superman's origin story, basically. I don't know, I've heard worse ideas. There's a bit more life to this serial than The Prince and the Pauper. Part of that is just inherent in the premise. There's usually a lot more action in a Robin Hood story, and the serial even allows itself a score every once in a while. Not often, but occasionally. But while The Legend of Robin Hood is a step up in engagement, it's still clearly cut from the same cloth as The Prince and the Pauper. A lot of people in power plotting quietly inside dark rooms. There's more players on the field than you typically see in a mainstream Robin Hood retelling, earls and clergy all over the place. In this version, Prince John, played by Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy David Dixon, is much more a pawn of the Sheriff of Nottingham and Sir Guy of Gisborne. Still evil, but needing a bit more prodding to do evil things. In steam rooms, if at all possible. This is a bleak production. You won't find Errol Flynn swashbuckling or Disney's song and dance here. In fact, the whole thing feels kind of proto-Game of Thrones, with all the backstabbing and surprise main character deaths that come with it. I actually kind of like it, but I can see this not being for everybody. Hidy, written by Swiss author Johanna Spiri, is a story of a little orphan girl who goes to live with her grandfather in the Swiss Alps. She warms the hearts of everyone around her, and eventually becomes the companion of a wealthy wheelchair-bound girl named Clara. We follow Hidy through misadventure while she charms the pants off everybody, and we learn that the three things you'll need to live a full life is God, goat milk, and the sweet mountain air. Unfortunately, this is the one serial from the list I wasn't able to get any footage of, outside of this microscopic clip from the opening of Once Upon a Classic. There was a VHS release at one point, but it's ridiculously hard to find, and the one time I saw it listed on an auction site, it was well outside my budget. And that's too bad, because Hidy had the best chance of not being totally dreary and packed with politics out of these potential serials. Oh well, if I ever get a copy, maybe I'll do an addendum video.
Daisy, I want you to promise me something.
What?
If we should ever be separated, you will think of me at my best.
What should separate us?
Make the promise, Daisy. Let us make that bargain.
Very well.
If circumstances should ever part us, you will think of me at my best.
You have no best to me, Steerforth, and no worst. Always equally loved and cherished in my heart.
God bless you, Daisy. And, good night.
David Copperfield is the Charles Dickens novel you read when you can't get a copy of Great Expectations. This is the life of David Copperfield from boyhood to adulthood, bouncing around from mentor figure to mentor figure, but without the real cool stuff like getting a convict's inheritance or Miss Havisham's creepy mansion. I tease, but David Copperfield is largely plotless. Some scholars believe it to be at least somewhat autobiographical of Dickens' life, and there is a ton of theming involving class and the disenfranchised, a common element in most of his works. This BBC serial has the best quality of the three I've been able to cover here, which is funny since it's the oldest. The set design is actually pretty detailed, and it's nice that the lighting crew was able to show up for once. Soundtrack is light, but this story doesn't hold any pretense towards adventure. It is very much a talky character drama, and lets the solid cast pull the emotional weight of the piece. There really isn't much to say about the serial beyond that. It's a solid David Copperfield adaptation. Of the three serials I managed to watch, sorry Hidy, The Legend of Robin Hood is perhaps my favorite. It's the one that makes the most interesting diversions from its source material and moves along the best. But you must remember, I'm in my 30s, with at least a passing familiarity with all these source materials, and I still found a lot of this a chore to sit through. I wouldn't have given any of this the time of day when I was a little kid. And I think this is the critical failure of children's classics. It tried to force a target audience that these serials were not originally made for. The original BBC serials were adult television. Not explicitly adult, not R-rated material, you don't have to show the little ones out of the room, but they weren't made to hold the attention of the 9-year-olds in the house. Once Upon a Classic, which aired the exact same material as children's classics, didn't pretend to be part of the children's PBS lineup alongside Sesame Street and Mr. Rogers. It aired on the adult side of things, alongside Nova and The Frugal Gourmet. Now, I'm not saying that there aren't kids out there who wouldn't be completely fascinated with English actors in fancy clothes quietly discussing inheritance and land borders in dark rooms, but the entire operation strikes me as a bunch of business suits attempting to fill time with content that they think, parents think, are good for kids. Not what kids want, but stuff that is good for them. Fancy dress adaptations of classic Western literature created by the BBC and endorsed by PBS? You can't get more wholesome than that. It strikes me a decision of someone whose entire career was in advertising. But it's a wasted effort if, for most kids, it's in one ear and out the other. The show is called Children's Classics, but no child considers David Copperfield a must-read. There are other shows that get this, that you need to make an effort to engage and entertain if you're aiming to introduce classic grown-up literature to young children. Wishbone is the gold standard for this. Fun, short, to-the-point adaptations of the classic works, a modern-day framing that lets kids relate to the old literature in their modern lives, and a cute, funny dog character to walk us all through it. But Nickelodeon 1980 wasn't going to make that kind of effort in creating any kind of narrative television outside the pre-existing Pinwheel and Hocus Pocus. The two shows they did create this year were easy media spotlight shows, magazine television. Narrative television would have to be purchased elsewhere, even if it didn't exactly fit the goals of the station. I'm not really disparaging the BBC serials themselves here. I didn't enjoy all of them, but they clearly have a place in the television landscape. The problem is that these shows were invited to a party, thought it was a professional party, and showed up in business suits and ties, only to discover that everyone else is in Bermuda shorts, Hawaiian shirts, and drinking martinis through crazy straws. It's really no surprise that children's classics left as early as they did.
Nick, 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 Nickelodeon. Nick, 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 Nickelodeon.
Next time, more British imports, but maybe more fitting for the channel. Today's shout out goes to Children's Television, The Art, the Business, and How It Works by Cy Schneider. Of course, a book written by the first head of Nickelodeon was going to be a must-read for this project. It's very enlightening, even if it focuses way more on Schneider's history with advertising than it does his history with Nickelodeon. You do still get a good sense of the attitudes and priorities of the man in charge of this period in the channel. As always, this project is funded thanks to my generous patrons on Patreon. If you'd like to support this project, throwing me $1 via Patreon is the best way to do it. The more I make, the better I can make the show, and the less likely it is that the floor beneath me will give way and I'll have to find a quote-unquote real job. But that's not the only way you can support the channel. You can like, share, subscribe, all those good things to help get the word out and more eyes on Knacks. Thank you all for watching.